So I won't be talking about psychedelics. I did last time. Many of you were here. Some of you are relieved. Some of you are disappointed. I am going to talk about the results of a community-based survey of construction safety climate for Hispanic workers. And I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Geoffrey. I'm a second-year student in the mining safety program. One more semester after this one, and really thrilled with all the relationships that I've developed with all of my colleagues and a lot of professors. Thank you for that. It's a great program. For all of you who may have started this semester, you're going to take a kick out of it. Again, results of a community-based survey of construction safety climate for Hispanic workers. Hispanic construction workers in the United States experience disproportionately high rates of both fatal and non-fatal injuries. Contributing factors cited in the literature include limited English proficiency and discriminatory practices that foster hazardous working conditions for Hispanic employees. Hispanic workers are disproportionately injured, fatally injured in U.S. construction. They are roughly 13% of the workforce, but account for roughly 28% of fatal injuries. That one stuck out to me. That was this paper is built on a lot of other research, and that was some research from another paper that was cited in this paper. And so I did a quick Google search and found this just a few weeks ago occurred. This is a 5-minute walk away from here and a 20-minute car ride. The purpose of the paper, the author's stated purpose is to characterize the safety climate of Hispanic construction workers, to describe the differences in perceptions by job position among workers, supervisors, and contractors, and also to identify safety climate factors that can be modified. We'll come back to this and see how they did with their stated purpose. But before I do that, you saw the title. I mentioned it again, but I feel like we need to cover this. What is safety climate? And I had this question at the end of my presentation, and I thought, you know what? Let's move this up to the front because it's something that I'm gonna say it again, and I want to kind of define it for you guys. So as define it as the paper defines it. So it's workers' shared perceptions of how much safety is truly prioritized on the job. What supervisors and companies actually do versus what they say, it's treated as a leading indicator of safety performance. Dr. Dov Zohar, professor at the Israel Institute of Technology, had first introduced the term in 1980. He said that it's a summary of employees' shared perceptions of safety policies. So it's a perception of safety. He went on to say that it's a summary of molar perceptions that employees share about their work environment. His initial work, Dr. Zohar, created a 40-item measure, a questionnaire, to assess factors like management commitment to safety training, and the perceived impact of safety on social status. His research established safety climate as a key concept in organizational psychology, linking employees' perceptions to actual safety outcomes. I want to talk more about that in a little bit. So this study is a cross-sectional study using a questionnaire, including questions in 6 dimensions. Yes, 6 dimensions. No, we're not talking about psychedelics again. There are these 6 dimensions include protective equipment, social support, safety over productivity, training, roles and responsibilities, and non-retaliation. This, if you can see it, oh yeah, nice big screen. This is a snapshot of part of the questionnaire. Questions like, Construction workers pay attention to the safety of other workers in the work site, always, sometimes, and never. Another example, construction workers put themselves at risk of injuries because they take shortcuts, always, sometimes, never. So there's a sense of the questionnaire. Participants in this questionnaire, in this survey, had to be employed in construction and living in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Recruitment occurred at roughly 20 local construction sites, plus some folks from some union lists and contractor directories, with data collected between June 2010 and April 2011. This was a cross-sectional, interviewer-assisted bilingual survey of Hispanic construction workers, plus supervisors and contractors, using a structured 40-item questionnaire. Each respondent received a 0 to 100 safety climate score based on the proportion of positive responses across these 6 dimensions. Applicable items were reverse scored. And I thought this was interesting. And the reason for this is clear. When you have a question, like what's an example here? So this gives you 1 point if you say always, and this gives you 1 point if you say never. So construction workers put themselves at risk of injury because they take shortcuts. If you say never, you get a point. Safety is a priority at the construction work, even when jobs run behind the schedule. If you say never, in that case, you get 0 points. And this serves a couple of functions, obviously, to get the right safety score. A positive safety score brings the number up. It brings the safety climate score up. But then it also keeps people from kind of, what's the term when you just pencil whip? Like when you're feeling, when you're doing a pre-trip inspection on a vehicle and you just kind of go through yes, 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 and it kind of keeps people from doing that, which I appreciate. I think, maybe if we had these kind of questions when we elected our political leaders, maybe we wouldn't just pencil whip blue or red or whatever the case may be. We might actually learn about the issues. But I digress. Analyses were performed in SPSS version 19 with descriptive statistics and Kruskal-Wallis tests to compare workers versus supervisors and contractors. Potential confounders, or the confounders that were addressed in this paper, such as age, English fluency, experience, years in the US, showed no meaningful associations. In total, 128 respondents were included in the study, 107 workers, 10 supervisors, and 11 contractors. And I had a lot of questions as I read through this paper. You may or may not feel free to any questions you have about any of this overview. We can ask those at the end. I won't answer them now because I have a lot of questions that I want to discuss at the end. The results of the study: overall safety climate was low across all roles, with workers scoring significantly lower than supervisors and contractors. The best rated dimension was protective equipment, while non-retaliation was the worst for every group, indicating persistent concerns about speaking up without job consequences. Here's a table from the paper. As you can see, supervisors and contractors scored higher. Their safety climate score was higher. The 107 construction workers scored lower. And as I already stated, the non-retaliation scores for safety climate are the lowest across the board. And I'm sure you're starting to see some questions. We'll address those, I hope. I told you we were going to come back to this slide. This is talking about the author's stated purpose. We're going to kind of go through these. Number one, did did the authors characterize the safety climate of Hispanic construction workers? Well, they built a useful questionnaire. I do think, though, that only one city limits generalizability, and of course, the cross-sectional design doesn't capture phase changes in safety climate or seasonal changes in safety climate that might occur in winter and summer. Also, and this one was important for me, there was no stated cut point for good versus poor. So they didn't say these scores need to be 60, these scores need to be 70. You know, you look, you see a lot of 30, you see a lot of 30s, and frankly, if you make 30% of your hits in Major League Baseball, you're going to go to the Hall of Fame. Any Blue Jays fans out here? Yeah, I see you. All right, Hunter. Okay, thank you, Hunter. There's one. That's pretty good. Take it. So there was no cut point. They didn't say. They just said it's poor. They didn't tell us what good is. There's also no comparison group. I would have liked to have seen a group of maybe non-Hispanic workers or a group of folks working in various types of construction. Now, the second stated purpose described differences in perceptions by job position. They did show workers scored significantly lower than supervisors and contractors. They drew that distinction, which I thought was important, even though they did say that the supervisors and contractors also scored low in their opinion. They used the term poor because, as you saw, everyone was below 50, which again, no stated cut point. So I'm not really sure what it means to score poorly. I do think, and this is obvious, there's a small sample size for the supervisors and contractors. You'd like to see a lot more in that group. And then there's a whole series of unmeasured confounders that we can talk about. That was kind of a negative for me. Did we identify safety climate factors that can be modified? I think the dimensions are actionable. They talked about having initially 9 dimensions, but they only chose 6 because they thought they were really practical and actionable in those dimensions. And so that's the reason they chose those 6. So I thought that was good. These are dimensions of the study that are something that can be adjusted. They highlighted some priority deficits. They pinpointed some of those, such as training appropriateness and fall prevention needs. They kind of called some of those out. They had a discussion of production pressure and respect as levers. So respect is a safety lever. Interesting. Although there was no intervention testing, so they highlighted some of these priority deficits, but they didn't. There was no testing of these adjustments. And there was no cost or feasibility analysis of the proposed changes. Any questions, discussion? Something probably popped up as we moved through there. Yes.
How would
Dr. Allen.
So this is a question for everybody, and I already know the answer, and so I apologize for kind of providing this out in here. But anyway, how would you describe their measurement development procedures? Good, bad, otherwise?
I would say that they didn't do ANOVA testing as their methodology because it wasn't normally distributed.
Yeah.
Because as you can see from that questionnaire, the answers are all over the place, and so they had to find a different way to do their analysis.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. Their measurement development process is absolutely horrendous and terrible, and I'm surprised it got published even in this international journal because they really didn't follow. So they cite Dove, and I'm glad you brought him up. He's God rest his soul. He was a very wonderful organizational psychologist, good friend of mine. But he'd be rolling in his grave right now in the way that this was developed, because they do, and this is a good thing, they do target a specific industry, which he would argue, now some have argued against this, but he would argue that we need industry-specific measures of safety climate, which is why there's a industry-specific safety climate measure that I helped develop with Dove and the First Center at Drexel.
So I pronounced his name correctly?
Yeah, Dove Zohar. But psychometricians, psychologists who develop measures would point out about a dozen things that were not done in the process of developing this, based on what they've described here. And so the issues with it are pretty stark because of that, and it may be a good measure. We just don't have any of the validity or reliability evidence to suggest that it is indeed a good measure. So
I wasn't convinced that construction workers in general wouldn't score the same way.
Yeah. And so there's a new study. I'm wondering if any of the OHP students are in here and read a recent study of safety climate in the construction industry. Anybody? Oh, yeah.
I'm going to be mean and say, what's the difference between safety climate and safety culture?
Yeah, I think it's really Dove just came up with, or Dr. Zohar
Yeah.
just came up with this term safety climate, and it's been used in a lot of research since 1980.
Yeah, so it's good. But yeah, it's interesting because the students in the occupational psychology class this week read a paper on safety climate in construction companies.
Cool.
And we did not use a construction specific safety climate measure in that study because since this came out, they've gone the other direction and said that Dove's original measures are actually better than most of the industry specific measures that have been developed because of things like this.
There's a reason why he had those other functions.
Yeah.
And the longer question.
Yeah. So anyway.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Yeah.
Anything else pop up for me that, yeah.
Yeah, Troy online has a question. Were the supervisors and contractors non-Hispanic?
They were all Hispanic. Good question. That's a very good question.
Did they try to accommodate for people who can't read or write?
I didn't read it. I didn't see anything about that.
So everybody had to fill out a form.
Everyone had to fill it. It was interviewer assisted, but they had to be able to fill it. Yes.
I would think that, potentially it could be a lot of people who are illiterate.
And right.
And they're probably at higher risk than
100%.
the other ones.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's a good question. Yes.
I think kind of like an interesting metric for safety climate that I didn't see touched on is like how rigorously the supervisors follow the rules. So I was like a middle manager at Amazon for a few years, and there was this whole thing of like safety climate where they really push safety. There's posters everywhere, what to do, what not to do. There's training. But then you see your manager when a deadline's due, not following any of it. And then that shows all the workers like, oh, these rules don't actually matter. And that was like a really big thing. So it'd be kind of interesting to see something about like, do you feel your superiors like follow the rules as well as they teach them or whatever?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've seen lots of examples in my work experience. Makes a big difference when the person who you expect is going to follow these rules doesn't. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain the training numbers in table?
Table 3.
I mean, for example, as I understand it, basically you got the training items. And you're saying they basically disagree with 2/3 of as supervisors. How can you explain?
The disagreement between the supervisors and the workers.
The supervisor basically saying they disagree with 2/3 of the item in the survey.
Right. Their scores are really low. How? Every single score they have, except for roles and responsibilities, and protective equipment, is below 50.
Right. Do you honestly believe Layton Construction has any supervisors who do not institute safety protocol? Anybody believe that? No, of course not. Dave Layton was almost killed on the job as a teenager. Okay. Dave told me personally the first thing they do is on his dad's construction sites. He was brought up in the family business. So Dave says they start every single project every morning safety first. So there's no way, you see what I'm getting at? Where do you, so I'm asking everybody, where can you get those kind of numbers? And if you observe what goes on in the real world, you'll know the answer right away. You've driven down the street, what do you see? You see who's doing roofing, little small mom and pops, right? So that's probably where these numbers I think are coming from. I don't know, just speculating.
And it's, yes, I think you touched on something that they addressed it. They said that they thought their numbers would be different if they did survey more of a commercial operation or a larger operation. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You see a lot of these residential companies that might reflect these numbers.
Yeah, there's strong evidence that a lot of the injuries and deaths and so forth that happen in construction happen in the smaller construction firms, which is why the company or the group that we got a grant from to study safety climate wanted us to study it specifically in small construction firms, because that's where the majority of the serious and fatal injuries occur in construction. In the larger corporations, they still happen in large corporations, larger construction firms, but they start out every day with what Kurt was talking about, what Dr. Hood was talking about, which is, they preach safety right up front. It doesn't mean everyone's going to choose to be safe, because, they got deadlines and then the supervisor stops doing it, so everybody else stops doing it. But
Amazon.
Right? But it is at least an espoused priority by these larger firms.
They do attempt to create a perception.
Correct.
That's it.
So I'm thinking about the way the questionnaire was answered. We have identified that language barrier is a big deal when it comes to construction workers, right? So the scale is in English. Was it translated? I'm assuming not.
They had it in Spanish.
They had it in Spanish. And
Yeah.
how was it administered then? The workers, was it online? Was it
They had it. It was a mix, and they had every person who assisted in the survey was bilingual.
What do you mean by assisted in the survey?
That's maybe one of our confounders, right? Yeah, and self-selection bias, right?
No, but what I'm thinking is, how did they answer it? Like, okay, so here's your paper, you can answer it, and if you don't understand something, I have someone here that speaks English and Spanish. Is that how it went?
Yes,
Yeah.
whether it was on the phone or in person.
It's at 93% were administered in Spanish. So, but there still are issues, right? Exactly what did they do? Do you also, when somebody answers the question weird, you then go back at them and say, did you understand this? There's different ways that this could be administered, which might produce data. Interesting thing.
Yeah, as soon as that person sitting next to them says anything, it's changed the item. So from a psychometric perspective, is if they read the question and provide an answer, then you know what they heard and what they're answering. But if the person next to them says, did you understand that? Would you like me to read it to you? Oh, let me tell you what this word means. As soon as you start doing that, you've now changed the measure. And so now whatever you get from that is not the same as what was intended when it was created. And I don't see anything in here about the translation and back translation process that's required when you go from one language to the next.
And back.
Right? And so there's a number of places where confounding could occur.
Long list of confounders, and every study has them, right? We could. It's so difficult to address all of them, but my gosh, to not even bring up some of this stuff in the study was a bit perplexing for me. And I guess so. I have two more questions. I've got a few minutes. Why did non-retaliation score lowest? And what steps can organizations take to curb this? I guess this paper's identified it's a problem. If you're willing to agree that that's a problem at work, what steps can organizations take to curb it? Yeah.
There's this kind of interesting thing of like, I'm forced to fill out this paperwork, and if I don't, I get in trouble. So it's like, when you tell me that you just had a safety incident or whatever, now I have to go do all this paperwork and whatever. So it's reported. But it took time out of my day. It reduced our productivity, blah, blah, blah. And so then it leads to this kind of resentment. And I think that's so I think that's super, super common in anything where productivity is the number one goal. And honestly, I think the only thing the organizations can really do to curb it is have an HR department or something, which a lot of construction firms, especially smaller ones, aren't great at. But just making like safety priority over productivity would solve so many problems. But I think including this one, if they're like, oh, I'm glad you told me, even if it reduced our productivity,
Right,
I'm out of my day.
right. There's kind of this idea that like, oh, where were you today? Where were you this morning? I was filling out some forms for that injury that. Okay, well, we were really backed up while you were gone, and
Mhm.
instead of like, oh, good, you got that done. That's important. That will make us safe. Right.
Sometimes they're put on like totally different jobs, like, oh, well, like we expect you to tough it out and you didn't. So now you're the guy holding the warning sign or whatever. It's
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Not a perception of safety at work. Dr. Heckman.
Yeah, another thing on the non-retaliation issue is remember, if somebody gives you positive feedback or somebody gives you negative feedback, which do you really remember? Which do you pass on to other people? Negative. Yeah, we're all designed to avoid death. So because of that, it tends to bias scores that way. The other thing, I know we're running out of time. Does anybody wear, or hardly anybody, wear hearing fall protection during roofing or in Salt Lake City? Nope. Nobody. Okay. But this is one of the neat things, we're all in these disciplines and we can watch what's going on in the real world driving down the street. It makes it so much more interesting. and I'm serious, you'll see wild stuff going. Sometimes you'll see really good stuff and sometimes really bad stuff, sometimes in between. But learn those skills of observation and start to get educated on what's going on in the real world. So also help you to interpret articles like this, the more you can learn about the real world.
One more question. I don't have it on a slide here, but I'm interested to know, do you guys think that safety climate is a good, and this perception of safety and this kind of stuff that we're talking about and trying to measure safety climate, do you think that safety climate is a good leading indicator for injury at work? And how does it compare to other ones like near miss reporting and some of this other stuff that we've been learning about as far as leading? Dr. Allen.
It is the number one predictor of safety compliance behavior.
Safety climate.
Safety climate is the number one predictor of safety compliance behavior, bar none.
Wow. That's excellent.
So whether
Good thing nobody else answered.
Yeah, whether it matters to, it still relates to injury, but it's upstream, right? So it's the compliance behavior or not that leads to the near misses and or the accidents and injuries, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's not as direct of a relationship, but if you don't have a good safety climate, people are not going to be complying with safety standards as well as they should. They'll do so to some degree because everybody has that programmed. Most of us have that programmed response of I don't want to die, so we're going to comply with things that we don't think are to keep ourselves alive. But you're not going to do them because the organization is supporting you to do them. You're going to do them because you think you should do them, right? So there's a disconnect there, and so you're more likely to take risks, more likely to have near misses, more likely to be injured. So yeah, it is the number one predictor of safety climate behavior, safety compliance behavior.
Thank you. Mr. Naylor.
Yeah, and just building on to what Dr. Allen said, I think a lot of that comes down to what we already touched on a little bit, but how we measure safety climate, right? Measuring what truly matters is important. I've seen lots of different methods of how safety climate's measured through cultural surveys or other means with very different questions. So I think kind of with that caveat of making sure that we're mindful of how we measure safety climate in an organization to drive the results that are most needed.
Thank you. Good insights. Yeah, thanks you guys. You helped me understand this a lot better. And with that, bid you adieu.
It's not trying to tell this one clear now, this is supposed to be out.
Did it work? That's nice.
Okay. Testing. Great. Appreciate the chance to be here. My name is Kyle Naylor. I'm a new student. This is my first semester in the CHP program focused on occupational injury prevention. So it's been fun to come back to school. I'm learning a lot and energized by what I learned and the interactions we all have. So the study that we're reviewing is the title is Reducing Enclosed Cab Drill Operators Respirable Dust Exposure with Effective Filtration and Pressurization Techniques. What's interesting about this study, or maybe not so interesting, is this is an article that covers research that's been ongoing for a long time. This actually was done back in 1999, early 2000s. It was published in 2005 about a problem related to respirable dust in mining. And the reason I chose this article is because we still have a long ways to go to solve the problem. We've been doing research. There's still a lot more research to do, but at least for me personally, I worked in lots of different industries and currently helping lead health and safety for a large precious metals producer. So in this study, this was focused on aggregates, sand and gravel, in particular a sand mine, where I'm working more on the metal side. However, there's lots of similarities in the processes that we use and the exposure potentials that exist. And so just to frame this, kind of going to break it into two parts. The first part being the context of the problem, why this research matters. The second part being where we'll dive into the study design, the methods, and then kind of picking apart what worked well, what other options are out there to improve upon those methods and research. So the authors of this study were evaluating how to lower a surface drill operator exposure to respirable dust inside of these enclosed cabs of a drill. You can see photos up there of what this drill actually looks like. There in the bottom center is the actual piece of equipment, at least the same make and model of equipment where they did this study. The top is just a generic example of what some of these mines look like. A surface mine, that's an open pit surface sand and gravel mine in upper state New York. The one in the study was in the Midwest in the United States. This was a partnership between NIOSH and also US Silica Company. I like to see that public-private partnership in driving innovation and research through these industry partnerships. And so that's just something I wanted to call out too. I think that's becoming more and more important, especially given some of the uncertainties that we see with NIOSH today. An interesting stat, after water, believe it or not, sand is the most used natural resource, and it represents the most mined resource on the planet. So small example, in the US, there's about 920 million tons of sand and gravel that were produced in 2023. Lots of value there, lots of jobs and industry that support that need. A lot of it goes into things that we see every day, like cement, producing cement. Concrete, obviously, is a component of concrete in that mixture. Road base, road covering, construction fill, glass manufacturing, even high-end electronics. There's also lots of like home goods, like manufactured stone and other things, which we can touch on lately, but that's becoming more and more of a controversial industry. So why does this matter? Once again, there's a couple of important concepts that we make clear. And I know for some, this is review, for others, this is maybe new, but there's two main forms of silica, sometimes called silica dioxide. There's crystalline silica. This means that atoms are arranged in a pattern, a structure called a crystal structure, right? And then there's amorphous silica, where that structure is disordered. So think of like glass or diatomaceous earth. This is a less hazardous form of silica. So what we're talking about, the reason I'm bringing up silica, even though it's not actually specifically measured in the study, which we'll get to later, is silica is a main component of any rock on Earth. Actually, if you just look at the Earth's crust as a whole, anywhere between 12 and 13% of a piece of rock, dirt that we have in our backyard is comprised of crystalline silica. Crazy, right? Crystalline silica, it's the known human carcinogen. But similar to something like asbestos, the fact that it's there, or the fact that I touch it, doesn't make it hazardous. What makes it hazardous is when it's small enough to get in my lungs, when it's suspended in the air so that I can inhale it. And that deposition into deep lung tissue is what causes cellular death, fibrosis, that we'll get into the pathology pathway and the mechanism of injury. But wanted to kind of highlight this because I think there's also a lack of awareness about just how prevalent this is and why that, in my opinion, is one of the reasons this problem is so hard to solve. You can see there's three main types of crystalline silica. There's quartz, cristobalite, and tridymite. By far the most common that we see, especially in mining, is quartz. For example, piece of granite has lots of crystalline silica. Any piece of quartz crystal is essentially almost pure crystalline silica. So let's talk about the mechanism of injury, the pathology behind this. We talked about crystalline silica versus amorphous silica, and now let's talk about what respirable means. So a respirable particle is something that basically has a 50% cut point of 4 microns of particles, typically 10 microns and less. So we're talking very small. To put it in perspective, there's a couple of photographs on this slide. You can see the one in the top right that shows you the distance that represents 10 micrometers, and those particulates of crystalline silica, very small. You can also see some of these deposited on a human hair under a microscope. So that image in the bottom right side are some examples of the size of this very fine respirable particle of crystalline silica. The reason that this isn't a fiber, so we probably learned a lot about like asbestos, right? It causes mesothelioma and other adverse effects. It's not a fiber, but this particulate, it's insoluble. So once it's deposited into our deep lung tissue, like the alveoli or the terminal bronchioles, basically it creates an immunological response for the macrophages come to attack that foreign body, that foreign item. They engulf that piece of respirable crystalline silica. But what happens is cellular death. They're not able to break that down, it's insoluble, and it causes that cell to lyse, to die. With that, you get certain levels of edema, and obviously our occupational physicians can explain much better than I can. But that over a period of time causes increased inflammation. So it's a progressive pulmonary disease that never gets better. Unfortunately, it only gets worse, and this disease is silicosis. So over time, it causes this edema, cellular death, edema, and fibrosis. In other words, fibrosis is like scar tissue of the lungs. So instead of those alveoli being able to do respiration and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide and making that possible, people are breathing, but we're effectively not doing respiration at the cellular level. So an awful disease, once again, silicosis being a progressive form of pneumoconiosis. This matters a lot, especially in the mining industry right now, because of, for a lot of reasons. First, protecting worker health, but a lot of talk in the industry right now is around MSHA's new silica rule. So MSHA is looking to reduce the permissible exposure limit of crystalline silica, respirable crystalline silica, to 50 micrograms per cubic meter. That's over an 8-hour time-weighted average of exposure, right? So for prolonged work shifts, it would be doing the calculations that you have to be a little below that to be within the permissible exposure limit. If you're working shorter shift durations, theoretically, from a compliance standpoint, you could be a little bit over that. The new standard requires extensive exposure monitoring. It mandates immediate notifications of overexposures from the employer to MSHA. And it also highlights, at least what today is kind of a controversial item on this bill, on this law, is that respirators are not allowed as a permanent solution. So respiratory protection is only allowed as a temporary solution while engineering controls are being in place. The industry is pushing back pretty hard on this, and different lobbying groups. This standard was supposed to go into effect back in April for the coal industry. I should say, from an enforcement perspective, enforcement was supposed to begin in April of this last year in the coal industry, and then April of this coming year for metal and non-metal mines. That has been stayed, and this is currently in litigation in the court system at the moment. So irregardless of where this lands, I think, the important thing is that we're driving improvements, but it'll be really interesting to see where this lands. In my personal opinion, I sometimes wonder why didn't MSHA just adopt what OSHA already has in place? Because some of the controversial topics of this bill are the items that, go above and beyond even what OSHA's doing. So I need your help. Does anyone have calculators with them, or if you can pull out your phone? Check my math, please, on this, okay? But just to put this into perspective, how much are we talking here? I like to do this, especially in raising awareness with industry leaders and even, new occupational health and safety professionals. How much are we talking here? When you drink tea or coffee, or when these little sugar packets you see in the restaurant, I just pulled one off the internet. So see that little packet there? That's a sugar packet. You can see it's pretty small based on the size of this person's thumb and finger. If you zoom in there, you see that the net weight of this sugar is 2.83 grams. That's 2.83 grams of sugar. Let's just say, let's just pretend that we convert that sugar into respirable crystalline silica. So 10 micrometers and less, right? Everything in that packet, 2.83 grams of respirable crystalline silica. And let's say in this room that we're in today, which I measured before, this is a rough measurement, don't judge me too harshly, right? But last week, I measured this room in a rough way that we're in right now. It's about 12 meters by 14.5 meters by 3 meters. So if you guys can help me out, what would the volume of this room be in cubic meters? Okay, we're good with the math so far. All right, good that you're checking me. So we got in this room about 522 cubic meters of volume. If we were to suspend 2.83 grams of respirable crystalline silica equally across all of this air in this room, do you think we would be above or below the MSHA permissible exposure limit for respirable crystalline silica?
Wow.
What do you think? Even without doing the calculation, any thoughts? Yeah.
I normally would think no, but considering you're giving this presentation.
Exactly. So that's a great point here, right? So it's not much, and there's no way we would even be able to visualize any difference in this environment having that aerosolized in this room. If we do the math, what does it come to? Does that number check out? If we divide 522 cubic meters by 2.83 grams within 522 cubic meters, does that number check out from a concentration standpoint? I'm getting thumbs up. Okay, so now's the last most important step. Using that concentration, is that above or below the permissible exposure limit, which I should have said, of 50 micrograms or 0.05 milligrams per cubic meter of respirable crystalline silica? Just a bit over. Does that check out on the math side? So we would be more than 100 times over, right? 2 orders of magnitude over the permissible exposure limit. This is a difficult problem, and this is why it's really persistent in mining. Here's some photos I've taken. This is me much younger, skinnier back in the day at Rio Tinto Kennecott, where I started my career. We were doing underground mining. And if you look closely, you can actually see I'm wearing a 37 millimeter cassette with a cyclone, being samples for respirable crystalline silica, in addition to noise. I was working in you can't see it down the other, this is the open pit. I was working underground that day in the Parvenu portal. It's an underground tunnel that the company operates. Considering that anywhere from 10 to 90% of that suspended dust is going to be crystalline silica, it puts it into perspective of how difficult a problem this is in industry. So here's a photograph of in a video of the drill rig that we're talking about where this study was done. Once again, trying to utilize positive pressure techniques and in-cab ventilation to reduce ingress and reduce exposure of this crystalline silica. Oh, I guess the video didn't play that. That's okay. So now we've laid the context of the problem, why it matters a lot, how difficult it is to solve, but how important it is to solve given the pathology and the mechanism of this injury. Now we'll shift gears to the study design. So this was a field intervention study that used phased engineering controls and repeated measurements over the duration of about a year. They did it in different seasons, weather conditions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They used an analysis of covariance. So they measured both inside of the cab and then they measured outside of the cab to be able to measure the protective factor that cab was providing as an engineering control to the worker working in that drill. So they performed baseline sampling with an existing air conditioning unit. The drill had 4 sills around the doors and windows. They then did a modification by adding an external makeup air pressurizer. They replaced the sills on all the doors and windows, and then they installed a floor heater because of the cold temperatures of the winter, thinking that floor heater would increase the positive pressure of the cab, which it did. And then they finally moved on to a second modification called post-mod B, where they installed a new low leakage HVAC system, a high efficiency recirculation filter, and the floor heater was removed, which we'll see why here in a second. So the measurements, they used this Dor Oliver cyclone, which you can see there on the top right. It's a little bit blocked by the screen there, but essentially a cyclone to be able to differentiate respirable dust from total suspended dust. You can see examples of the blower, the pre-filter, the secondary filters that were included in these cab modifications as an engineering control. Here you see some of the tables and figures of the results of both the baseline, post-modification A, post-modification B, in addition to the active sampling techniques that they used with the air pumps and the Dor Oliver cyclones. They utilized particulate direct reading instruments that gave real-time data. This data, as we'll talk about, emphasize the importance of some of the human factors around, for example, things as simple as opening and closing the door in the cab, and also dusty clothing and boots and the effect that had on real-time readings of respirable dust. You can see a summary of the statistics of the dust concentration measured and how that data was analyzed for covariance and converted logarithmically. And then in the bottom and the top right there, you can also see photo examples of that in-cab heater, which, as you can see from the results, actually caused a lot of issues. This is one of the reasons I like this study is it shows that even though sometimes we think we're installing a control that's going to reduce a hazard or fix the issue, we got to verify and validate with data. And in this case, the theory was this in-cab floor level heater would add to the positive pressure, which it did, and thereby reduce the external, I guess, the infiltration of external dust. What they didn't perceive is that in-cab heater created airflow, which then suspended a lot of the accumulated dust from the floor into the breathing zone of the person. So what they thought was a control actually caused a greater problem than existed during the baseline sampling method, which is why they then moved on to post-modification B in strategizing the use of other pieces like the HVAC system to filter not just the outside air, but the inside air as well from the dust accumulations that get on the bottom of someone's boots from working in the field, getting into the cab, or even on clothing. So in summary, you can see that the results of the baseline sampling, which was actually relatively good despite weak pressurization. You can see the 17x, give or take, rise in exposures after they installed that heater. And then you can also see the improvements after removing the floor heater, adding the high efficiency recirculation filter. They also used floor sweep compounds, which is basically, I think in this case, they used a canola oil-based compound. Think of it in a way to consolidate and bind the dust to prevent that dust from going into suspension. So these are a sweeping compound is basically trying to prevent that suspension of dust in the cab. I mentioned they did use real-time particulate detectors that highlighted the dust exposure peaks when the cab doors were left open, and then also certain movements from the operators with clothing. Here you can see a summary of the costs of the modification as well, and how, which is always a consideration for industry. So conclusions, filtration plus positive pressurization plus tight cab seals are foundational. They found that, recirculation filtering is crucial for dust generated inside the cab. So considering the dust that comes in on boots, on clothing, and even those heaters or other things that could stir up mechanically and aerosolize these fine respirable particles. They concluded that human factors matter, so keeping those doors shut, the cabs and the clothing clean, and then fourth, avoid low-mounted floor heaters and ventilation systems. Instead, look at things like heating and cooling systems through filtered, like HVAC systems, and which are better options. So it's not just pressurization, but a combination of both cab positive pressure and filtration in combination. In this photo, you can see basically a diagram of what that system looks like for that cab. And I think it's interesting, we're not just thinking about drill cabs, but any type of mobile equipment cab, also that sometimes the workstations that you might see periodically through industry that you can also designate for people to utilize and reducing exposures, even in a manufacturing setting. Study strengths and weaknesses. You can see, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too far into these, but you can check those out. And I'm curious to get your thoughts here in the Q&A at the end. But one of the limitations, right, is this was done about 25 years ago. But to emphasize it again, is there's still so much work needed to solve this problem because we're far from it. And I put a picture up here. About 10 days ago, I was down in Argentina and Chile with a partnership we have with Anglo American, AIHA, and Chile's equivalent of NIOSH. And we met with these Chilean government entities. And one of the members of this delegation was Dr. Jim McLaughlin. He was with NIOSH for many years. He was then faculty at Purdue University. And while we were there, it was pretty cool, but he was experimenting his VEM monitor, video exposure monitoring device. The real-time data, the real-time particulate monitors they used in the study were like thousands of dollars back then, thousands and thousands of dollars. The one that Dr. McLaughlin was trialing while we were working at this mine in Chile cost $400 all in. And most of it's for the software subscription, right? So it's something from a compliance standpoint you wouldn't necessarily be able to go at, but from a performance perspective, it's incredibly valuable to being able to see in real time where are the most important sources of exposure and addressing those point sources in the moments where sometimes you wouldn't expect it, right? Not having to wait when you turn on a heater, for example, in a cab, you can identify those variables that are causing and contributing to exposures. But that's just an overlook of the mine site there in Chile. This is Spot. This is a mine that I support. I'm out in Nevada, and we're utilizing Spot to help us do inspections in our conveyance corridor, which you can see here. It's essentially a huge corridor of crushing and conveyance that we have to process precious metals, including gold and silver. It's actually the largest heap leach silver operation in North America, just an hour and a half or so away from Reno, Nevada. This was me walking down the corridor. Spot, this little guy or gal, she's going out there and collecting some pretty interesting data. We have infrared sensors, so doing the inspections, and then also basically helping us because this crushing corridor is where we've measured the highest concentrations. So real-time sensors have improved, which provide lots of opportunity for future research. Automation is an interesting thing that's taking people out of the hazards, but then also in thinking about we were talking about this a little bit today in our OHP class with Dr. Allen, what are those psychosocial risks that we should also consider as technology and practices change, given that all a company is people, but also as you start to try to replace people, there's different hazards that can be introduced and psychosocial risks on workforces that we need to engage. So for the sake of time, I won't ask these questions. Instead, I'll turn it over to the class. If there's questions, thoughts on strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities on the study. Pretty quiet. Maybe a question. What
Here's a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So do you have more information about the use of that robot? Because sometimes companies buy robots, there's a hype, and they treat it more like a mascot than a good tool, and then it ends up in the corner after the hype is gone.
Yep.
Where would you say the usefulness of this robot is right now?
To be honest, and to your point, I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. There's lots of hype, not just with the robotics, but we've been talking about things like big data for a lot of years before artificial intelligence was a thing. And what I found is most companies have lots of data and they hype it up, but do we actually know how to utilize data effectively? That's actually one of the things that drove me to come back to school is I feel like we have incredible opportunities to, from a research perspective, to use data to make decisions of greater impact in industry. To your question about robotics, right now, the trial, we're trying to be very careful in how we define the problem. If you think something's going to just solve all of your problems, you're being naive, right? So making sure that your problem is first clearly defined in making sure that the use case and the business case is aligned with that. So we've focused in on a couple of very specific use cases based on the problems or the opportunities that we have at the mine to address things like inspections in highly hazardous environments, where, for example, underground tunnel systems where we have high particulates, but we need people in there periodically throughout the shift to make sure that our conveyance equipment is not overheating, that we don't have leaks that we haven't detected. And so that's the use case we're working on right now, and then kind of expanding from there. But a great question, because I think sometimes companies and just generally in society, it's easy to hype things without being realistic about first, what's the problem? How will the solution help? Great question. Yeah.
So this study was done a long time ago. Did they actually implement these practices and procedures over the last 20 years, or are there still serious concerns with this equipment?
It's a great question, and I was curious about the same thing, Spencer. It doesn't specify in here. I know that from a manufacturing point of view, modern day equipment typically is much better. There's more awareness that large producers like Caterpillar, Komatsu, and others are prioritizing in-cab ventilation systems with both pressurization and filtration. So it's a little outdated in that sense. But at the same time, we have lots of mines, especially smaller mines, that are using older equipment, where I think that's where the value of this comes into play. Without buying a piece of equipment that costs several $1 million, for a few $1,000s, there's options to keep people safe. But I couldn't answer that. Other questions? I think we're over time, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Everybody, we'll see you here next week.